All right, good morning, or whatever time it is when you're listening to this. We are on to the 23rd Sutra, the association of the soul with the mind, and thus with that which the mind perceives, produces an understanding of the nature of that which is perceived, and likewise of the perceiver. I'm going to have to read this again. The association of the soul with the mind, and thus with that which the mind perceives. Okay, the soul and with the mind and what it perceives produces an understanding of the nature of that which is perceived, and likewise of the perceiver. Great, okay. You should be able to see that. It took me twice, but it makes sense. In this sutra, the attention of the student is drawn to the primary quality which he must develop, that of discrimination. Its meaning is therefore very clear. The pairs of opposites, spirit and matter, Purusha and Prakriti, are brought into close association, and that union must come to be recognized by the soul, the perceiving consciousness. Through the process of this blending of the dualities, the soul, the thinker, comes to a comprehension of the nature which is his very own, spiritual nature, and the nature of the phenomenal world which he perceives, contacts, and uses. The organ of perception is the mind and the five senses, and from the standpoint of the soul, they form one instrument. For a long period and through many incarnations, the soul or thinker identifies himself with this organ of perception, and in the earlier stages, with that also which he perceives through its use. He regards the phenomenal body he uses, the physical body, as himself, as witness the expression, I am tired or I am hungry. He identifies himself with his body of feeling or desire and says, I am cross or I want money. He identifies himself with the mental vehicle and regards himself as thinking thus as so. It is this identification which results in the theological differences and the doctrinal and sectarian diversities everywhere to be found. And in this fifth root race, and particularly in this fifth sub-race, this identification reaches its apotheosis. It is the error of the personal self, not of the spiritual self. This realization of the lower nature is part of the great evolutionary process, but must be followed by a realization of the other polar opposite, the spiritual self. This is brought about by the soul beginning to practice discrimination, at first theoretically and intellectually. Hence the great value of the present era of criticism and polemical discussion, as it forms part of the planetary discriminative process and later experimentally. This discrimination leads eventually to three things. One, an understanding of the distinction between spirit and matter. Two, a comprehension of the nature, therefore, of the soul, which is the product of this union and is the son produced by the union of the father and of the mother matter. Three, a development whereby the soul begins to identify itself with the spiritual aspect and not with the phenomenal world of forms. This later stage is greatly aided and hastened through the practice of Raja Yoga, and hence the determination of the hierarchy To give this science to the critical, discriminating West, it should be borne in mind that the soul passes through great stages in the unifying process, and that the word yoga covers the evolutionary development of the human monad. There's should be one more. One, the union of the soul with the form and its identification with the matter aspect. Two, the union of the thinking man or the self-conscious reflection in the three worlds with the spiritual man on its own plane. And three, the union of the spiritual man or divine thinker with its father in heaven, the monad or spirit aspect. Stage one covers the period from the first incarnation up to the treading of the probationary path. Stage two covers the period of probationary path up to the third initiation upon the path of discipleship. And stage three covers the final stages of the path of initiation. I mean, a lot is being told to us here. And we've discussed this quite a bit through these books. And, you know, it's said that we move from at-one-ment to at-one-ment with, you know, recognition of a duality in between. And you can see here, the soul with the form is with the form and its identification with the matter aspect. That's an at-one-ment in this, you know, in a big way. We're identified with the body, and then later with spirit. Let's keep going. All right, 24, the 24th sutra. The cause of this association is ignorance or avidya. Avidya. This has to be overcome. Ignorance of the real nature of the soul and an urge to find out its own nature and its power is the cause of the soul's identifying itself with the organs of perception and with that which they perceive or bring within the consciousness of the soul. When through this ignorance and its consequences, the soul fails to find what it is seeking, there comes the stage when the search takes on a different form and the soul itself searches for reality. It might be expressed thus: identification with the phenomenal world and the use of the outgoing organs of perception covers the period which the real man spends in what is called the hall of ignorance, satiety, restlessness, and a search for the knowledge of the self or soul characterizes the period spent in the hall of learning. Realization, expansion of consciousness, and identification with the spiritual man covers the period spent in the hall of wisdom. The terms human life, mystic life, and occult life apply to these three stages. All right, well, let's take a look at that again real quick, just so we might you know, in an interesting way, you might say that this, if we're going to relate this to the chart, you might say this is physical, astral, and mental plane, right? The ignorance, learning, and wisdom, potentially. All right, the 25th sutra. When ignorance is brought to an end through non-association with the things perceived, this is the great liberation. During the process of incarnation, the seer, the soul, is submerged in the great Maya or illusion. He is imprisoned by his own thought forms and thought creations, and in those of the three worlds also. He regards himself as part of the phenomenal world. When through experience and discrimination, he can distinguish between himself and those forms, then the process of liberation can proceed and eventually culminate in the great renunciation, which once and for all sets a man free from the three worlds. This process is a progressive one and cannot be effected all at once. It covers two stages. One, the stage of probation, or as the Christian expresses it, the path of purification. Two, the stage of discipleship in two parts. A, discipleship itself, or the steadfast training and discipline administered to the personal lower self by the soul, directed by his guru or master. Initiation, or the progressive expansions of consciousness through which the disciple passes under the guidance of the master. That was B there if I didn't say that. So A is discipleship itself, steadfast training and discipline administered to the personal lower self by the soul, directed by his guru or master. Certain words describe this dual process. A, aspiration, B, discipline, C, purification, D, the practice of the means of yoga or union, E, initiation, F, realization, and G, union. And, you know, DK mentions also crisis, tension, and emergence are also phases leading up to the next expansion. We got time. We're going to keep going. This is all good stuff. The 26th Sutra, the state of bondage is overcome through perfectly maintained discrimination. A word here on discrimination will be of value as it is the first great method of attaining liberation or freedom from the three worlds. Based as it is on a realization of the essential duality of nature and regarding nature as a result of the union of the two polarities of the absolute all, spirit and matter, discrimination is at first an attitude of mind and must be sedulously cultivated. The premise of the duality is admitted as a logical basis for further work, and the theory is tested out in an effort to prove the truth. The aspirant then definitely assumes the attitude of higher polarity, that of spirit manifesting as the soul or inner ruler, and seeks in the affairs of every day to discriminate between the forms and life and the life, between the form and the life, between the soul and the body, between the sum total of the lower manifestation, physical, astral, and mental man, and the real self, the cause of the lower manifestation. He seeks in the affairs of every day to cultivate a consciousness of the real and a negation of the unreal, and this he carries into all his relationships and into all his affairs. He accustoms himself through persistent unbroken practice to distinguish between the self and the not self, and to occupy himself with the affairs of spirit and not with those of the great Maya or world of forms. This distinction is at first theoretical, then intellectual, but later assumes more reality and enters into the happenings of the emotional and physical world. Finally, in the following of this method eventuates in the entrance of the aspirant into an entirely new admission or dimension, and this his identification with a life and a world of being dissociated from the three worlds of human endeavor. When this is so, the new environment becomes familiar to him, so that he knows not only the form, but the subjective reality which produces or causes the existence of the forms. Then he passes on to the cultivation of the next great quality, which is dispassion or desirelessness. A man may be able to distinguish between the real and the true, between the substance and the life which animates it, and yet desire or go out towards the form existence. This too must be overcome before perfect liberation, emancipation, or freedom is attained. In one of the old commentaries in the archives of the Lodge of Masters, the following words are found. It suffices not to know the way, nor to feel the force which serveth to extract the life from out of the forms of Maya. A moment of great portent must take place wherein the cello breaketh by one act, and through a word of power, the illusory sutratma which bindeth him to form. Like the spider which gathereth up the thread again within himself, whereby he ventured forth into unknown realms, so the cello withdraweth himself from all the forms in the three realms of being which have hitherto enticed. The above merits close consideration and can be linked to the thought embodied in the occult phrase, before a man can tread the path, he must become that path himself. And I think we can, as I read this, I see the magnetic attractions being broken here, right? What I'm not fully familiar with is this breaking by one act and through a word of power, the illusory sutratma which bindeth him to form. I guess that's something that we find out at some point later. But up to this point, we can see how we certainly see how the magnetic attractions are released and we're no longer held by them. Right. The state of bondage is overcome through perfectly maintained discrimination. And I had read at some point that, and it might have been somebody like Ram Dass had said something to the effect, something along the lines of, it takes over your life. You become consumed by this journey. And I remember having heard that early on, pretty early on, years ago. And I was not consumed. I was just getting my feet wet, I guess, if you will. I was just starting, which that's a pretty occult phrase, I guess. I was just starting to get curious, I guess you could say, or it was part of my life, but I desperately wanted more, obviously. And I knew you have to listen to some of these things people say, because this dude was a professor and then he gave his life up, and went to India and pursued enlightenment. And then it became his full life. So it's very easy to see that that's what can happen. And, he's not the only one. And my thought was, oh my goodness, like how long does this take before, it's a natural process, and it takes time, because there's a lot that has to be worked out as it does become and take over all of our thoughts and all of our outer expression. And there's a lot to work through to get to that point, certainly. So it's not quick and easy. All right, well, let's do this one, because it looks like we're starting a newer section after this, right, which gets into the 8 means. So let's do 27. 27 Sutra. The knowledge or illumination achieved is 7-fold and is attained progressively. The Hindu teaching holds that the states of mind consciousness are 7 in number. And if we look over here at our chart, there's 7 planes. So let's see what if they correlate. The 6th sense and its use bring about 7 modes of thought, or to put it more technically, there are 7 major modifications of the thinking principle. And the 6th sense is what we know as to be the mind. All right, so desire for knowledge is 1. It is this which drives forth the prodigal son, the soul, into the 3 worlds of illusion, or it is this which sends forth the monad or spirit into incarnation. This basic desire is what causes all experience. But let's look at this again. It is this which desire for knowledge is what drives the prodigal son forth into the 3 worlds of illusion, or to carry the metaphor further back, it is this which sends forth the monad or spirit into incarnation. Okay, so we're looking at to carry the metaphor further back still. All right, so again, we're looking at like a north node type situation there, where there's a continuity from life to life, but we're looking all the way back, right? And maybe at more than one life and incarnation at a time, potentially. I'm not sure. So, all right, let's go. Basically, the prodigal son is definitely found here on the physical plane. And I would say desire for freedom, the result of experience and of investigations which the soul carries on in its manifold life cycles, is to cause a great longing for a different condition and a great desire for liberation, for freedom from the wheel of rebirth. And that would likely happen here on the astral plane. Desire for happiness. This is a basic quality of all human beings, though it shows itself in many different ways. It is based upon an inherent faculty of discrimination, upon deep-seated capacity to contrast the father's home and the prodigal's present condition. It is this inherent capacity for bliss or happiness which produces that restlessness and urge to change which lies back of the evolutionary urge itself. It is the cause of activity and progress. Dissatisfaction with the present condition is based upon a dim memory of a time of satisfaction and of bliss. This has to be regained before peace can be known. Let's keep going. I don't know how to correlate these things, actually. Maybe we'll see. Desire to do one's duty. The first three modifications of the thinking principle eventually bring evolving humanity to the state where the motive for life comes to be simply the fulfillment of one's dharma. Yeah, that happens. It's like, oh, just let me do what I need to do here. I came here to do what I need to do. Let's do that. The longing for knowledge, for freedom, and for happiness has brought the man to a state of utter dissatisfaction. Nothing brings him any joy or peace. He has exhausted himself in the search for joy for himself. Now he begins to widen his horizon to search where, to search where, in the group and in his environment, what he seeks may lie. He awakens to a sense of responsibility to others and begins to seek for happiness in the fulfillment of his obligations to his dependencies, family, friends, and all whom he contacts. The new tendency is the beginning of the life of service, which leads eventually to a full realization of the significance of group consciousness. Certainly true. And then HPB has said that a sense of responsibility is the first indication of the awakening of the ego or the Christ principle. Yeah, certainly recognition of that there is multiple lives, and we do have this dharma, or we do have this fulfillment of a goal for each life, or you can look at it like these labors of Hercules and movement through the zodiac. And once a Christian, in a sense, has recognized that reincarnation is real, well, then there's almost an instant, once it's known to be true, there's an instant recognition of responsibility. And probably this right here comes along with it. And in our experience, astrology is a great way to get to that point, right? And astrology and an understanding of our North Node, probably our rising sign and North Node, and our South Node, where we came from, where we're moving to, and that's all, pretty key here to that bit of awakening. All right, and then 5, there's sorrow. The greater the refinement of the human vehicle, the greater the response of the nervous system to the pairs of opposites, pain and pleasure. As a man progresses and rises on the ladder of evolution in the human family, it becomes apparent that his capacity to appreciate sorrow or joy is greatly increased. This becomes terribly true in the case of an aspirant and of a disciple. His sense of values becomes so acute and his physical vehicle so sensitized that he suffers more than the average man. This serves to drive him forward with increasing activity in his search. His response to the outer contacts is ever more rapid, and his capacity for pain, physical and emotional, becomes greatly increased. This is apparent in the 5th race, and particularly in the 5th subrace, in the increasing frequency of suicide. The capacity of the race to suffer is due to the development and refinement of physical vehicle and to the evolution of the body of feeling, the astral. I was going to say, we must here be referencing the astral. So this is all astral, actually. It appears that this is all taking place on the astral. Let's keep going to make sure, though. 5 is fear. As the mental body develops and the modifications of the thinking principle become more rapid, fear in that which it produces begin to demonstrate. This is not the instinctual fear of animals in the savage races, which is based upon the response of the physical body to the physical plane conditions, but the fear of the mind based upon memory, imagination, and anticipation, and the power to visualize. These are difficult to overcome and can only be dominated by the ego or soul itself. And here's the ego or soul itself, right here, sitting on the 3rd level of the mental plane here. Then we have doubt. This is one of the most interesting of the modifications, for it concerns causes more than effects. Let's just say this: fear is what evil uses essentially to keep us down. You can't move on if there's fear, right? That's not, fear has to be overcome. And there's fear of, there's many types of fears, but fear needs to be recognized as an emotion that does not have a place anywhere else except in these lower worlds, except in the lower 3 here, and really except just down here in this astral and below. It may I assume it'll reach up into this area because we're said to be kama manasic, right, which is astral mental. But for the most part, once we transcend that, fear is gone. Fear is gone forever. Let's go into doubt here again. Sorry about that. This is one of the most interesting of the modifications, where it concerns causes more than effects. The man who doubts can be described perhaps as doubting himself as an arbiter of his fate, his fellow men as to their nature and reactions, God, or the first cause as witnessed by the controversies built up around religion and its exponents, nature itself, which doubt urges him on to constant scientific investigation, and finally, the mind itself. When he begins to question the capacity of the mind to explain, interpret, and comprehend, he has practically exhausted the sum total of his resources in the 3 worlds. And this is very interesting because this is outlining, literally, it seems like, the whole process, leading up to this point, essentially. We doubt ourselves, we doubt our fellow men, we doubt our nature and reactions. God, or the first cause, is witnessed by the controversies built up around religion and its exponents. Certainly, we see a lot of the world doing that right now. Nature itself, which doubt urges him on to constant scientific investigation, or even esoteric investigation, or seeking. What I don't want to say esoteric, I'll say seeking. We're looking to find the answers. And finally, the mind itself. The tendency of these 7 states of mind, produced through the experience of the man upon the wheel of life, is to bring him to the point where he feels that physical plane living, sentiency, and mental processes have nothing to give and utterly fail to satisfy him. he reaches the stage which Paul refers to when he says, I count all things but loss that I may win Christ. I see where this went now. Interesting. 7 stages of illumination have been described by a Hindu teacher as follows. The stage wherein the Chola realizes that he has run the whole gamut of life experience in the 3 worlds and can say, I have known all that was to be known, nothing further remains to know. His place on the ladder is revealed to him. He knows what he has to do. This relates to the first modification of the thinking principle, desire for knowledge. The stage wherein the second one being the stage wherein he frees himself from every known limitation and can say, I have freed myself from my fetters. This stage is long, but results in the attainment of freedom and relates to the second of the modifications dealt with above. Which is the desire for freedom, of course. And then the third stage, wherein the consciousness shifts completely out of the lower personality and becomes the true spiritual consciousness, centered in the real man, the ego or soul. This brings the consciousness of the Christ nature, which is love, peace, and truth. He can now say, I have reached my goal. Nothing remains to attract me in the 3 worlds. Desire for happiness is satisfied. The third modification is transcended. And that's the desire for happiness. And then the fourth, the stage wherein he can say with truth, I have fulfilled my dharma and accomplished my whole duty. He has worked off karma and fulfilled the law. Thus he becomes a master and a wielder of the law. This stage has relation to the 4th modification. And then we have this 5th, the stage wherein complete control of the mind is achieved, and the pure can say, my mind is at rest. Then and only then, when complete rest is known, can the true contemplation and samadhi of the highest kind be known. Sorrow, the 5th modification, is dispelled by the glory of the illumination received. Pairs of opposites are no longer at war. And 6th, the stage wherein the Chela realizes that matter or form have no longer any power over him. He can then say the gunas or qualities of matter in the 3 worlds no longer attract me. They call forth no response from me. Fear, therefore, is eliminated, for there is nothing in the disciple which can attract him to evil, death, or pain. Thus, equally, the 6th modification is overcome, and realization of the true nature of divinity and utter bliss takes its place. Fear is gone. And then the 7th, being full self-realization, is the next and final stage. The initiate can now say with full conscious knowledge, I am that I am, and he knows himself as one with the all self. Doubt no longer controls. The full light of day or completed illumination takes place and floods the whole being of the seer. These are the 7 stages upon the path, the 7 stations of the cross, as the Christian puts it, the 7 great initiations, and the 7 ways to bliss. Now the path of the just shineth ever more and more until the perfect day. Well, it's interesting, because here we would have, if we looked over to this side of the chart, we have the first initiation, the second initiation, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and then I guess this would be the 6th and 7th being at the very the very top. Yeah. So, and each of these we see, because this is the Father in heaven. This is our Father in heaven sitting here. First initiation of the physical plane. Second, transcending. We're at the astral. We're over the astral plane, walking over the waters. The third, over the mental. Fourth, the release of the causal body. Fifth, you become a master apparently, and then sixth, I and the Father are one during this, and then I'm not exactly fully sure, but fully certain about any of this stuff, to be honest with you. So, these are the things that come out. I believe the seventh is, it's with the one, right? So we got 7 planes, we have 7 initiations. These would be very high, and Christ was said to have taken the 7th initiation through the use of Jesus on the cross. As Jesus was taking the 4th initiation, Christ was taking the 7th initiation, and that was reference. We can reference from Bethlehem to Calvary. And that book, which we read first, is just amazing. All right, I think we call it there for today. That's a lot. And we really are seeing a lot here. We're talking about the mind, and this is in this area, this being the soul here. So we're trying to work our way up to the soul. We're building the Antakarana. We're building the rainbow bridge. So it looks, here we go. We will, in the rest of this part of the second book, presents the 8 great means to yoga. So we will get started on the 28th with the 28th sutra tomorrow. Yep. All right. Have a great day. Happy studying.